Okay, so now, as of Wednesday, when we finished class, we still had to do the elastic in the sleeve. There is an elastic measurement for you guys in the order of operations. What you need to do is cut that elastic and overlap it a little and do a stitch to reinforce it. Go back and forth a couple times. Let me get my hand out of the way. There is a lot of strain on the elastic if it's tight, so you don't want this to be in the garment and pull apart because of the tension of too much pulling it on and off. So now we have our sleeve already has the overlock. This is a half an inch elastic. That means our casing needs to be just a bit larger so it doesn't catch the elastic as we're sewing. We do not want to do that. So there is a notch in here, and if you follow the notch, it's about 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to turn that up. If you feel comfortable at any point pinning this, then please do so. If it makes it easier for you. I'm going to start. You can't pin the entire thing because you got to do the elastic. So let's start. Let's see, make sure I don't have anything in the way. So anyway, I'm going to put this in the casing and turn up that 3/4 inch on the hanger. It's hard to do because I need my fingers to hold it down. So let's start on the edge. And whenever you stitch a hem, or in this case, a casing, always stitch on your overlock. Don't stitch close to the bottom. It's not a good idea. It's not a good finish. So now, I want to make sure you can see this. This is turned up. See, my elastic is inside, and this turn up is about 3/4 of an inch. And I'm going to start. Definitely the back top. Takes a little manipulation because the elastic is so much narrower than the sleeve itself, and you're sewing it as you go. So you definitely want to go in small increments. And as you go, you pull the elastic. If you do it in small increments, you can actually flatten the elastic out in a certain small section, and that makes it easier for you to stitch. Can you see that? Right on the edge. It's measuring 3/4 here on my indicator. Let's pull this. And I'll get another section that's flat. And there may come a point in this development that you won't be able to keep it flat at all. Always put your needle down too, because it won't have a tendency to move in a spot that you don't want. Now I'm at the very end, and it might require me to pull instead of flattening the elastic out. See that? That's the last of the elastic. Making sure the entire time, making sure that your elastic is up inside the casing, like almost on the edge here, so that when you're stitching here on this overlock, you are not catching the elastic. That's not going to work for the sleeve. And if that happens, you're going to have to rip it out and start again. Back tack again, or at the end. See, that's why we want the elastic to be like a free inside of that casing, because we can manipulate it so that we can put the fullness wherever we need it to be. And all that, and if this happens to be tight on the arm, you know, that stress of going on and off the arm is what causes the elastic to come apart if, in fact, you don't stitch it enough. Okay, so that's our elastic.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
How long was that piece of elastic?
Refer to your order of operations. It gives you the measurement in there.
I was looking at it. I don't think it says actually.
All right, well, let me check. I'm going to stop recording in a minute. Let me go check. Okay, here we go. Now, the next operation, we're nearly finished. The next operation that we're going to do is our facing pieces. Now, you know that you have one piece for the center front, for the whole neck. Let me move this camera. That's the whole neckline. Then we have two pieces that go down the center back. You want it to be joined so that it looks like this. One continuous facing piece. Here's the neck, here's the center back. So now we're going to flip it so that we can put the right sides together. And when you sew it, line it up on the edge so that the edge matches. Because when you go a half an inch, that's what it's going to look like. And that is normal. Then we do the other one. I'm going to do this one first. 1/2 inch seam allowance. Back tacking as you go. Now the other side. So now your facing is ready to put onto your bodice. The one thing that I would probably do is to press these seams open. To save time, I'm going to pin them open so that when I stitch them, they'll be accurate. I'm trying to position this so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay. So let's begin. Conveniently, it's going to match because this is the way I cut it out originally. This is the blue side. I'm going to start pinning this at the bottom This is a good time to pin things because there's quite a lot to pin. There's quite a lot to sew. Don't forget, always putting the right sides of the fabric together. Started at the corner here, and I'm going to work my way down to the bottom and pin. Making sure that all your seam allowances are going in the right direction. Now, here at the neck, you're using that small piece of facing, that round piece, to go around the neck of the bodice. Now, it is all in one fabric. And see, I'm not, instead of pressing this open, I'm just going to pin these two seams open. You should have a notch, center front notch, and that's going to go right there at the center front, which is, it's the point at which you have one half in one fabric and one half in the other fabric. So it's pretty good visually for you to comprehend, to make sure that it's accurate. Otherwise, there would have been a notch in the garment itself. Now, over to the next, the shoulder. Making sure, see my seam allowance is not pressed open on the bodice side. Okay. And we're going to come back to this corner. I'm going to pin that corner. And then all the way down. This is the facing. And this is your bodice. All the way to the bottom. Okay, so now the entire garment has facing. You'll see that you want to go to stitch. We're going to start at the bottom of the right back. It's in one stitch, and we only want to do a 1/4 of an inch. That's all we need. 1/4 of an inch. Right at the bottom, on the back tack. We go all the way around this whole facing and the neck. And then down the other side, so the facing that's on the other side. I like to pull them because, like I said, there's a lot of times when you're sewing, this foot has a little bit of a drag on whatever the fabric on top is. So if you're trying to get them to be the same, it's not a bad idea to pull as you go, because this foot drags this facing, and by the time we're done at the top, we might have a little excess of the facing, which we don't want. So I'm just going to pull as I go. take my pins out because I don't really want to break my needle. It's still good. Now, when it gets at the top, needle down. Okay, so we see we're at the top. We're ready to go around the neck. We're going to turn, and we're going to sew the curve. Now, especially in this case, there's never a time when you want to go more than 1/4 of an inch, because then your neck, that curved seam, will never lay flat. So, 1/4 of an inch. Slowly, just because it is a shape, and it will give you a better result. Make sure that my seams are pressed. This one's not. So. Again, have my center front. My seams are pressed open. My notch is matching. This is a good seam to make sure that it matches, because you have, believe it or not, you have a little bit of a bias on both sides. So you can manipulate it so that it matches by pulling the side that needs to be a little bit bigger. We're good otherwise for this. 1/4 of an inch all the way to the center back. Needle down. I'm going to sew straight down the back. At the end, we're going to back tack. Now our facing is completely stitched to the garment. Next operation will be at the center back facing. Press all of your seam allowance towards the facing itself and do an edge stitch. Now, because of the shape of this, you won't be able to do, you'll only be able to do them in sections. Like the center back, you can do, but you won't be able to continue around the neck because you got that one turn point, that point that you turn, and you won't be able to get into the facing. Do this stitch. Now, of course, if you press this, it would be a lot easier. It's just on the edge, and it's holding all of this fullness towards the facing itself. Now you're going to see when we get up to the neck how I can't go only but so far, because we can't get in this corner. We will never be able to get this corner under the needle. So we just have to go as far as we humanly possibly can go. We did this on the toddler dress, also, if you recall. So that I don't have stitches that I don't want, I'm going to allow a little bit of room where I don't stitch. I'm going to continue on my way around the neck by doing the facing. Again, because of that corner, I can only get but so far. So we're going to, again, make sure that the bulk of your seam allowance is facing towards the facing. And once you can get it under the needle, that's where you want to start. Doesn't allow you much room. So. This is critical. The center front of this, it needs to lay flat. You do not want it to not lay flat, because then the facing will start to come into the center front of the dress, or bodice, as you will, and you really don't want that to happen. That's why we do the stay stitch around the neck, always. It's a shaped seam. It has a mind of its own. It doesn't stay where you want it to stay unless you do this. Now again, we're getting to that corner, so I'm not going to be able to go too far, and that's okay. A little extra thread here, but you see, it's right on the edge, and when it's after it's been pressed, it will always, when pressed, it will always stay on the inside of the garment instead of coming out onto the garment itself. It's to see the seam. That's totally what you do not want. It's kind of like when we did the toddler shorts and how that short seam rolled out. Okay, now we're going to do the center back again on the other side. When I can see that it's laying flat, that's where I'm going to start my stitching. It's not going to be at the corner, for sure. This is a large, lengthwise that is, it's a large piece of the garment, so you want this to roll towards the inside. This is the location where your buttons and your buttonholes are going to be. So you want it to be nice and flat, with the facing always staying on the inside of the garment. If I pressed this before I did this, this would be a much simpler operation. I'm pressing it with my fingers as I go. Now, if you remember when we had the toddler dress, we had the back, same kind of a situation. Here's what the best way to get this corner out is to fold the side one side down and the other side down and push it through. That'll give you a nice, accurate corner. If you have to, you can get a pin or your seam ripper and pull it out. Be careful because with the seam ripper, you might just rip the fabric. You don't want that. I fold one side down, I fold the other side, and I push it through with my finger. Now this fabric, because it's not muslin and it's a little thicker, needs to be pulled out a little bit more. Okay, that's all I needed, just one little bit of a pull. Now, I'm going to press this, and I'll show you what the next operation is. I'm going to pause. Okay, so now I'm pressed and ready to go. But before I start, I just want to make a comment on this neckline. As you sew, you want to be ultra careful that at any point that you're sewing facing to the neckline, you don't see any little tucks. Those will not be good for your grade. So you want to make sure that it's as flat as mine is. There are no tucks in any of this neckline seam, and that's really what you want. Okay, so now the facing is all pressed and flat. As you can see down the center back, it's good and flat. No pleats. The one thing we have to do now, we're almost finished, is the hem. It's a good thing that we did the stay stitch, because what we're doing now is we're turning this back. Get rid of these extra threads. So here's your facing. Now I'm going to turn it, open it up, and turn it on the garment side. If you want to pin it, that's okay. Now this is what it's going to look like. You're facing, you want to, that's why you only stay stitch on one side. Now you're going to sew this down. Half an inch. Tack. Yeah, we're going to do the other side. Okay, as you can see, this is free because there's nothing, no stitches on the garment side of this facing, but you want to turn the facing back and stitch that a half an inch. Only the length of the facing. That's as far as you need to go. Now, same the same way that we took out the corner of the neck is what we're going to take the corner of this garment out. The other side. Okay. Now, if you feel comfortable pressing this first, by all means do so, or pinning. Occasionally, when there's a little bit more involved than you originally planned, doing this prep work is actually in your favor. So I'm not going to bother. I know that I'm going to say this okay. I just want to turn this up now. I want to just catch it on the edge of the facing, and I'm going to do the hem. I'm going to turn it up the bottom. As you can see, 1/2 inch. I'm going to sew it directly on that overlocked edge. But I'm going to start with it a little bit on the facing. I want the facing to stay inside the garment. Go slowly if you feel comfortable. Press it, pin it, either way, whatever gives you the best results or you feel most comfortable with. Make sure that the facing doesn't flip, which it's starting to do. If I'd press this, it might not. Just want to go in a little bit of the edge of the facing. And the hem is complete. So on the outside, this is what the garment will look like. So that is your hem. This is a good time for you to press this entire thing to make everything lay flat. There is also one other small job that needs to be done. Because this facing is loose, we need to stitch it down. I would absolutely advise pinning this first because you want this to be flat. In this case, there are ways to do it by machine. But I would suggest, for the sake of precision, doing it right, you can stitch by hand from, let me see if I have a needle. This is good. I'm using contrast thread for everything, so you can absolutely see what it is that I'm doing. Nice knot. And just right here at the shoulder seam, I'm going to go underneath the seam. Make sure you don't catch the actual garment here on the outside. We don't need this to show at all. We just wanted to do the spacing. And attach the facing, the width of the side seam, this shoulder seam. Making sure I have my finger underneath here so that I make sure I'm not catching the garment. And then reinforce it at the end and you're done. This is for the sheer purpose. Now I've done this and I don't have any stitches on the outside, so that's a good thing. It's basically just holding this facing inside the garment. Otherwise, like this side that I haven't really done yet, it would have a tendency to come out because it's not stitched down. So now the only thing that we have left to do are buttons and buttonholes. And as you know, we're not officially going to make buttonholes as much as we are going to baste where you want the buttonhole to be. That would require you to know which buttons you're going to use. It has a lot to do with the size of the button. As in the toddler dress, I explained that before. Let's just, for argument's sake, say we're going to use a 3/4 inch button. That means, okay, so this is the left, this is the right side. It's always for women, right over left. So, you're going to measure everything. So let's say we're going to say half of a 3/4 inch button would be 3/8. And then we're going to add another 1/8 to that. So that's half of an inch, not in your view. Okay. That means half an inch in and a half of an inch down. I'm going to make my mark. And then I'm going to make my other mark, the width of the button. So let's say this is 3/4 of an inch. I marked my buttonhole, my first buttonhole. It's a good idea to come down here and do the last button. Again, these rulers are great because they're see-through and you can see the exact spot that's a half. I would go a little bit higher, go past the hem. Let's say an inch and a half up. So we want to go. That's your last button. Now, before we do that, let's measure the distance between these buttons. It's exactly 14 inches. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have to divide 14 into 5 different sections. That would leave 14 into, calculator would be good right about now. 14 into 5 into 14, 2 3/4. So the difference between each button is going to be 2 3/4. Now, when I do this, a lot of times I like to do it with a pin, just so I can get a visual and make sure that what I'm doing is accurate. So from this button to the next one, 2 3/4, here's my pin. This is my button. It looks a little small to me. Oh, maybe I have to do it by 4 sections. Yeah, yeah. 1, 2, 3. No, this is right. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I did 6 buttons. That means instead of 14 inches divided by 5, I want to divide it by 4, not 5. So 4 into 14 goes 3 and a half. 3 and a half. That's more like it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. Now that I've positioned this and I know that it's right, I'm going to mark my other buttons. And ultimately, for the purposes of this class, you are not responsible to do buttonholes, but you are responsible to mark these buttons so that we know that you utilized the procedure accurately. So start with a basting stitch. Go from one side of the buttonhole to the other. Very loosely, just knot it. We'll do that for all of your buttons. And if in fact you have your buttons, that would be a good time for you to actually measure. And for me, this is my first button. You get it in the picture. This is my first buttonhole rather. So I'm going to mark where this buttonhole starts. I'm going to push it back and I'm going to make a mark. And that's where I'm going to put my first button. It looks a little, no, I didn't do this right. It's a little too far. It really needs to be down here. You could actually mark these if it would show up on your fabric. And if it doesn't, you could actually sew the button on this side of the garment. So that is the entire bodice. We've done all of the operations. So now it's up to you to finish this. Like I said, this will be due on Wednesday at the end of class. So any questions, just let me know. Great, thank you.